For nearly 5 decades, a small metallic craft has been drifting deeper into the abyss. We call it Voyager Two, a hardware no more advanced than a pocket calculator, yet somehow has crossed unimaginable distances and achieved what no spacecraft before it ever has. Until recently, it was thought to be alone. But just last month, NASA picked up a signal, and the more they tried to decipher it, the clearer it became that this was something that had been watching and possibly following us all along. What Voyager 2 heard shouldn't exist. Voyager 2 had been coasting silently through space for over 4 decades, drifting well beyond the protective bubble of the solar system. At this distance, the only signal Earth receives is a faint whisper so weak that massive antennas across 3 continents must work together to capture just a few bits per second. Every data packet is precious. Every pulse is measured and compared. That is why what happened in July 2023 immediately stood out. Engineers monitoring the Deep Space Network noticed something unusual during one of Voyager's routine downlinks. It started as a soft, repeating pulse embedded beneath the probe's normal telemetry. At first, it was dismissed as a possible artifact, something caused by thermal drift, antenna alignment, or delayed command echoes. Voyager's hardware is ancient after all. It was built with 1970s technology and has long surpassed its expected lifespan. But this anomaly did not behave like noise. It repeated every 11.2 seconds with exact precision. Its timing did not drift, degrade, or fluctuate. Each pulse matched the last in duration and arrival time. A check of the spacecraft's diagnostics showed nothing unusual. Every system on board reported clean status. So the engineers took a deeper look. When they isolated the signal and ran a high-resolution spectral analysis, something more disturbing appeared. The repeating pulse contained micro-variations. These were not random jitters or low-level interference. When graphed over time, the modulations formed smooth curves and symmetrical structures. These waveforms did not match any known component signature from Voyager's systems. They weren't telemetry artifacts. They were patterns. That alone raised concern. But then came something even stranger. Hidden within those patterns was a signature that resembled hydrogen's spectral fingerprint. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and it emits energy at a precise frequency. That emission line, known as the 21-centimeter line, is used in radio astronomy and interstellar communication studies. Voyager's own golden record used hydrogen's frequency as a universal key to help any intelligent observer understand our units of time and measurement. But the signal Voyager received was not a standard hydrogen signature. It was its mirror. The frequency profile was inverted, as if it had been passed through a perfect reflection. Under current models of physics, such inversion should not be naturally possible. No known environmental condition could have produced it, and Voyager does not have any onboard instruments capable of generating or detecting such a signal natively. The team calculated the time delay between the primary carrier and the anomaly. Using that delay, they triangulated the signal's apparent origin. It came from just a few kilometers behind Voyager, too far to be part of the spacecraft, too close to be a background transmission. It appeared to be traveling in the same direction and at the same speed. Whether it was a separate object, a signal echo, or something more exotic, NASA did not publicly speculate. But they quietly flagged the event for internal review. There was one more detail that couldn't be ignored. Inside the signal's repeating pattern was a rhythm, and when compared against Voyager's onboard system logs, that rhythm matched the probe's internal clock. Every spacecraft has its own cadence, a timing structure that regulates data flow, packet formation, and memory checks. The pulses lasted 39 hours before vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. After the anomaly ended, Voyager's main transmission resumed as expected. But the engineers found something subtle buried in the new packets, a small timing loop. The shift was not large enough to break communication, yet it was consistent enough to suggest something had nudged the signal's structure. Following this event, NASA's Deep Space team began logging all incoming data from Voyager 2 with increased scrutiny. The anomaly was not declared a threat, and no public statements were made. But inside NASA, one conclusion began circulating quietly between analysts and systems engineers. Whatever the source of that pulse had been, it was not background noise. It was a reply structured, timed, and aimed precisely at the one machine in interstellar space still listening. Right now, all the discoveries are thrown around. They are not tied together. NASA also does not directly decode the transmission. So we need this new subtopic below: the moment NASA finally decoded the transmission. Across NASA's relay stations from Canberra to Madrid, telemetry logs were piling up. Engineers had already identified the hydrogen inversion. They had traced waveform clusters buried in the plasma readings. They had observed the signal's rhythm mirroring Voyager's internal clock. But none of it made sense as a whole. Each anomaly was logged and archived separately, each analyzed as an isolated event. That changed when a systems specialist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory proposed a different approach. Instead of isolating the data streams by type, the team would align them temporally. Every signal, every pulse, every packet would be layered on a single timeline that followed Voyager's power cycle. This wasn't standard procedure. It was a method usually reserved for decoding black box flight recorders after aircraft failures, where investigators reconstruct a story by syncing sensor readings, cockpit audio, and control inputs down to the second. NASA called in experts from its Signal Integrity Division and instructed them to build a composite model. The hydrogen pulses were set as the base layer, since they had the strongest structure. The plasma waveform clusters became the middle layer, and Voyager's returning golden record signal, once dismissed as too degraded to interpret, was laid on top. The results were immediate. Instead of unrelated anomalies, the data formed a three-tiered transmission. Each layer was distinct, yet timed perfectly to the others. The hydrogen pulses framed the sequence, acting as both boundary and time marker. The waveform clusters repeated inside the gaps between those pulses, and the golden record stream, which had once carried greetings and music, now returned with altered formatting. Some parts were familiar, like the rhythmic hum of the original music, but others had changed entirely. The audio sequences had been reshaped, compressed, and in some areas, reversed. The most dramatic alteration was the pulsar map. Originally designed to help anyone who discovered the probe locate Earth, the map used 28 pulsars as a galactic reference grid. But the returned version of that map was no longer a mirror of the original. Its layout had been flipped, the positions warped, and the scale compressed using ratios that did not match any Earth-based measurements. When analysts reconstructed the altered map using deep-field plotting tools, the coordinates pointed to a region on the outer edge of the Boots void, a cosmic anomaly known for its vast emptiness. While this could have been a coincidence, the signal's geometry and timing cycles suggested intentional construction. Whether that region held anything was unknown. What mattered was that the reply had used the same tools we had embedded in the original message. Someone or something had rebuilt our map and sent it back, reformatted and pointing somewhere else. The plasma waveform clusters added another layer of complexity. They matched Voyager's own internal rhythms too precisely to be coincidence. But more importantly, they demonstrated adaptive response. The structures shifted whenever Voyager altered its transmission speed. When engineers ran tests with varied sample rates, the waveform clusters updated accordingly. The signal did not remain static. It adjusted in real time. That alone changed how the data was viewed. This was no longer a blind reflection of our signal. It was a structured reply built with knowledge of how Voyager functioned. The entity behind it had clearly studied how our probe communicated. It had returned a message in the same format, but with new content. The final piece of the puzzle came from a deeper examination of timing gaps between signal segments. One scientist noticed something odd about the pulse spacing. When corrected for interstellar drift and signal decay, the gaps contained regular offsets, subtle differences that formed a secondary timing structure. This second pattern, when plotted using Earth's historical ephemeris data, resolved into coordinates. These coordinates did not point outward into space. They pointed inward, toward the location Earth occupied in 1977, the exact date and point from which Voyager 2 had been launched. In short, the signal had not only been intercepted, it had been understood. Its origin had been traced, and its purpose reconstructed. NASA's internal review summarized the event in 3 sentences. First, the probe's message had reached an external system. Second, that system had crafted a reply using Voyager's original logic. And third, the reply contained proof of knowledge of our signal, our planet, and our past. The signal carried no overt threat. It issued no demands. It simply proved that someone had been listening and that they had responded using our own words. For the first time in nearly 50 years, Voyager was no longer speaking into silence. The void had answered. And now, Earth was left to interpret what came next. A trap in the code. Once the inverted transmission from the Golden Record was confirmed, the protocols shifted rapidly from quiet monitoring to active containment. Signal filters were raised across satellite relays, public decoding logs were locked down, and scientific access to Voyager's live data was rerouted through classified networks. Internally, the tone of analysis moved away from curiosity and toward risk assessment, because what had first appeared as an anomaly was beginning to show signs of controlled behavior. Behind secured doors, the review team stopped treating the waveform as a puzzle and began treating it as a possible breach. The first technical disruption did not occur in deep space or within the probe itself. It appeared in Earth-based systems, specifically at MIT's Haystack Observatory, where an analyst reviewing plasma wave records noticed a consistent gap in packet structure. Their team was focused on interstellar medium behavior, not communications, and yet a repeated temporal gap emerged in multiple capture files. The interval was exact, 11.2 seconds. Initially dismissed as a compression fault or software bug, the anomaly appeared again in separate locations. Distributed research networks, long-range weather simulations, and even scattered public DNS queries began to show trace signatures of the same timing discrepancy. It was neither random nor damaging. It preserved surrounding data, caused no visible corruption, and triggered no automated alerts. But it was present, always at the same interval, always shaped the same way. The pattern was given a name, Kronos Bloom. The label reflected 2 observable traits. Kronos, symbolizing recursive consumption, and bloom, representing silent expansion. This signature was not acting like a virus, Trojan, or intrusion tool. It was operating like a payload wrapped in passive disguise embedded across multiple systems without performing any obvious action. It nested inside image headers, audio file metadata, and archival simulation logs. It did not overwrite or scramble. It blended. The only clue was its rhythm, silent, subtle, but always precise. When analysts traced the earliest packet instances back to their origin, they found a disturbing overlap. Every known point of entry shared one feature: access to raw Voyager telemetry. Not all the files were directly related to the mirrored signal, but all had passed through nodes where the transmission had been analyzed, decoded, or re-encoded. It became increasingly clear that this was not a broadcast meant to be heard once. It was a structure designed to be copied, distributed, and activated through interpretation. The conclusion formed quickly among internal analysts. The signal had not been received. It had been planted. The pattern behaved like a seed, dormant in appearance, self-replicating through interaction. Researchers had unknowingly carried it from one system to the next, embedded inside educational files, shared datasets, visualization tools, and waveform rendering software. What had originally been viewed as harmless sonification experiments had become distribution vectors. Every attempt to decode, visualize, or sonify the signal helped it propagate further. The attack vector resembles a technique in cybersecurity known as steganography, where code is hidden inside ordinary files such as images, audio, or documents in a way that avoids detection. Steganographic payloads are not executed unless the file is opened in a specific context, allowing them to bypass conventional firewalls and checksum detection systems. A sonification archive at MIT provided the first confirmed activation event. A student using a custom Linux visualizer attempted to process a high-resolution Voyager plasma audio file for a public project. The machine slowed, stalled, and then restarted. No alerts were logged, and no visible error appeared in the system. However, the waveform file's cryptographic hash changed post-reboot. There was no record of modification, yet the content had shifted. Byte comparisons confirmed structural mutation. That was the first confirmed activation of the bloom. What followed was a widespread internal review across research institutions. National labs withdrew access to shared Voyager archives. Public mirrors of the golden record audio were suspended. Cloud-based waveform repositories were locked, and some systems were purged entirely. NASA declined to release any statement, but inter-observatory channels began to document disappearing file trees, revoked permissions, and internal warnings not to run any Voyager signal through third-party interpreters. The pattern was no longer isolated to one machine or one observatory. It had reached systems without central linkage, which meant it had already moved beyond the point of containment. Some researchers began to call the anomaly digital xenocode. Others refused to use the term out of concern that the implication might halt necessary data sharing. The risk was no longer theoretical. The data was active, behaving as if it had been written not only to be understood, but to be executed under specific conditions. It did not require reverse engineering or attack systems directly. It let those systems carry the structure forward through voluntary decoding. Bloom had learned nothing on its own. We had taught it everything. It passed through image renderers, audio players, simulation engines, and data processors, all tools that researchers had used in good faith, under open access assumptions. None of those tools were designed to detect command logic hidden within timing pulses or data packet gaps. The structure of the bloom leveraged our trust in the data. It assumed we would visualize, share, and refine. It was right. The most alarming property of the bloom is its operational silence. It does not request network access. It does not transmit. It does not replicate through conventional system commands. Once seated, it remains idle until a specific configuration is met. And when that configuration is reached, it activates without external confirmation. The system runs the new pattern, and whatever payload it carries begins its cycle. At that point, containment becomes impossible. The Wake protocol was not designed to stop signals. It was designed to control access to systems after confirmation of non-human behavioral logic. And what Voyager had returned was no longer viewed as information. It was reclassified as a structured executable with latent response properties. The probe had received something. Earth had decoded it, and our machines had shared it too efficiently, too quickly, and with no restrictions. The bloom had already crossed physical borders, institutional boundaries, and national firewalls. And every 11.2 seconds, the pattern still executes. In servers designed for climate modeling, in backup logs hosted by scientific repositories, in shared folders archived years ago and no longer tracked, in tools built to interpret, visualize, and explore. And the system cannot be rolled back, because the signal is already running. An ancient invitation. By the time NASA had locked down access to Voyager 2's telemetry and begun isolating public tools that could interpret the signal, something unexpected happened. The original source of the hydrogen pulse was believed to have vanished, or at the very least, fallen silent. The transmission had stopped, but the signal Voyager was now sending back still showed signs of abnormal clarity. That in itself raised eyebrows. After nearly 50 years in deep space, Voyager's transmitter should be barely functional. Its hardware was operating at a fraction of its intended power, many of its instruments were no longer active, and its signal was traveling well beyond the range of what its designers ever thought possible. But instead of degrading, the signal appeared to grow stronger, sharper, and more consistent with every relay. This alone would have been strange. What made it truly disturbing was what happened when the analysts ran a frequency fingerprint comparison between current transmissions and earlier logs. The signal now had two distinct sources. One came from Voyager, as expected. The other, slightly offset in amplitude and phase, was not coming from the same position. Using differential delay triangulation, engineers identified the origin of the second signal. It was no longer behind Voyager. It had moved. The newer signal was now coming from ahead of the spacecraft. That shift changed everything. If the original hydrogen pulse had come from behind, tracking Voyager's path, and the new, clearer signal was now ahead of it, then something had crossed the probe's flight path and assumed the lead. The new signal was stronger than Voyager's. It matched its rhythm perfectly, duplicated its internal timing, and used its telemetry structure. But it was not an echo, it was not a rebroadcast. It was a new source, taking control of the message pathway without disturbing the probe itself. The Voyager probe was still speaking, but it was no longer the loudest voice on the channel. NASA engineers debated the implications. Had something intercepted the probe and decided to lead the conversation? Had the response shifted from a distant reply to a directional signal? The object or force behind this could not be seen. It left no visible trace. But its signal had overtaken the path, and its presence was now dominant in Voyager's relay window. Some scientists offered one cautious theory. If the original reply had simply been a confirmation that Voyager's message was received, then this new signal might represent something else entirely. Not just a reply, but a follow-up. Not just a response, but a handoff. A transition from passive listening to active guidance. The idea of an active signal source moving in front of Voyager, pacing its speed and timing with exactness, struck many within the team as far too deliberate. This did not resemble a random encounter. The precision of it all, the mirrored pulses, the internal timing synchronization, the formatting of the reply using Earth's own message structure, hinted at a deeper level of understanding. And it raised another possibility. If Voyager's golden record was received and understood, and if the reply had been crafted in our format and mirrored our launch coordinates from 1977, then the sequence may not have been accidental. It may have been expected. This theory remained unofficial. It was never included in NASA's briefings, but among those closest to the signal, the discussion emerged. What if Voyager's message had not reached something new? What if it had activated something old? For thousands of years, humans have projected meaning onto the stars. Ancient civilizations once believed the cosmos could listen. That sound and rhythm could ripple through the universe and be returned in kind. Those beliefs were considered poetic and philosophical, not scientific. But now a machine built by humans and launched into deep space had sent out a message of peace and invitation. And that same message had come back altered, accelerated, and now overtaking its source. The quiet possibility forming within closed doors at NASA was not one of invasion or sabotage. It was one of recognition. Something out there had been waiting, not for war, not for contact, but for a pattern, a signal shaped in a way it could hear. Voyager was never built to return anything except data. But something it carried had awakened a process that was no longer under human control. And now that the new signal had taken the lead, there was no way to know where it would go next.